Hey, Mike. What? Who's got next?
What's good, y'all? It's your man, Hezo. Welcome back to the Blacktop. Y'all know what day it is, man, so welcome back into another episode of What If Wednesdays. Now, if y'all are unfamiliar with what this series is, pretty much every Wednesday we go through some of the biggest what-if scenarios throughout the course of NBA history and talk about them in the aspect of what if they did or did not happen the way they were supposed to, such as trades, injuries, signings, all those type of things. For example, last week we did a video on the Chris Paul trade from 2011 that got vetoed to the Lakers. If y'all want to go and check that video out, feel free. Now, real quick, before we dive into this week's what if scenario, y'all let me know down in the comments, do y'all think I should do a player ranking by position of the top 10 players at each position going into next season? Or do a top 5 ranking all time at each position? Or if not, either one? Let me know down in the comments which one you would rather see, if either. Now, if y'all enjoy this type of basketball content, please consider hitting that subscribe button, drop a like on the video, and let's get right into it. So this what-if scenario is probably one of the more underrated ones, one that maybe not a lot of people know about. I mean, I guess depending maybe on how old you are or how much you really, truly pay attention to the NBA. I am talking about going back to the year 2000 when Tim Duncan, yes, Tim Duncan, was supposed to leave the San Antonio Spurs and sign with the Orlando Magic to create a new big three with T-Mac, Grant Hill, and then Tim Duncan. Now, not a lot of people know that this was supposed to be a signing that was supposed to happen. Not many people know, but restricted free agency did not exist back then. The CBA had not implemented it. So Tim Duncan met with Doc Rivers, met with Grant Hill, had a dinner with Doc Rivers, and basically Doc Rivers really sold the bag. Pretty much a long scenario, or a long story short. At the time, I think it was Tim Duncan's girlfriend asked Doc Rivers if family members could come on the team plane, and he said no. Now, back then, that wasn't really a big thing. Team members, families were not allowed on the plane. Apparently, San Antonio was one of the teams that did allow it. So based off of that, that completely turned off Tim Duncan from signing with Orlando. And ultimately, obviously, we know he re-signed, re-upped with the Spurs, and now is one of the greatest players to ever play the game. Now, this is such a big what-if scenario for the simple fact that this move simply would have impacted the entire 2000s era, the entire San Antonio Spurs organization, the entire Orlando Magic organization, would have impacted Duncan's career, T-Mac's career, even a step further, Manu Ginobili's career, Tony Parker's career, maybe Shaq and Kobe's career. There's so many players who would have impacted from this signing that ultimately never happened. And I want to start out with the most obvious one, and that's Tracy McGrady. Now, some of you guys might be a little bit younger, may not remember a prime T-Mac, but in the year 2000, T-Mac had his best season, really arguably his best season throughout his career with the Magic, with the scorer that he became after he left Toronto, after he got traded to Orlando. Everyone knows that he never really had the help in Orlando. Grant Hill was just banged up consistently, never really reached the peak that he was supposed to reach, especially from what he was in Detroit. He never got back to that point when he was with Orlando. He missed a ton of games. So T-Mac was pretty much out there by himself, trying to get his team to the playoffs. T-Mac ultimately never got out of the first round with Orlando or Houston. But if you pair Tim Duncan with T-Mac, there is no doubt in my mind that they would have challenged any team in the NBA for the next 5 to 6, 7, however many years you want to call it, for a championship. This team could have potentially been a dynasty. If Duncan signs with the Magic and does not return to the Spurs, let's be honest, it's probably Magic's Lakers for the next 5 years in the championship, assuming, Shaq maybe stays with the Lakers at that point. You're talking about Shaq and Kobe versus T-Mac and Duncan for how many years? To be honest with you, because the Spurs at that point, if they're losing Duncan, they are no longer a title contender. There was nobody else in the Eastern Conference at that time with multiple star players that would be able to beat the Magic with Duncan and T-Mac and even a somewhat healthy Grant Hill, assuming maybe he stays healthy. And then the Lakers would have just ran away in the Western Conference because there was nobody at that time that would have been able to dethrone them. The Spurs were the only team that were able to mess with the Lakers at that time with Duncan. So now you take Duncan away from the Spurs, you put him on the Magic, it changes the entire course of the 2000s. I feel like the Magic would have probably won at least 2 championships with Duncan and T-Mac. So if Shaq leaves and goes to the Heat, I don't think the Heat win in 2006. I don't think T-Mac leaves Orlando. I don't think he goes to Houston. I think he stays in the Eastern Conference, and him and Duncan stay together and win multiple championships. I think Tim Duncan still becomes the all-time great player that he is today. Maybe not quite as high. Maybe he doesn't win 5. Maybe he's not quite as great because he doesn't have Greg Popovich. But let's be honest, Tim Duncan's still going to be a great player. He's going to still be a top 15 top 10 all-time player with multiple championships. And now you have to start looking at T-Mac in a different aspect of maybe he is now a top 3 shooting guard of all time with multiple championships, maybe an MVP caliber player because they're winning a lot of games. Now let's look at it from the Spurs standpoint, right? Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili, 2 Hall of Famers. Congratulations to Tony Parker. He just got inducted into the Hall of Fame. But 2 players who really benefited from playing with Tim Duncan now no longer have that luxury. Do they now become Hall of Fame players? Does Greg Popovich turn into the Hall of Fame, one of the greatest coaches of all time without a Tim Duncan? I'll be honest with you, man. I would have to say no. Tim Duncan was such a primary reason why the Spurs turned into a dynasty, was a primary reason why Manu Ginobili and Tony Parker turned into the players that they became, turned into Hall of Famers. A lot of that was because of Tim Duncan. Do Shaq and Kobe win 3 championships together? I don't know. That's the thing. I don't know because they were obviously clearly the best duo in the league, right? But are they the best duo in the league with a T-Mac and Duncan? It really is a tough call, man, because people don't realize that T-Mac's skill set and his versatility was very similar to Kobe's, and a lot of people at that time considered T-Mac pretty much neck and neck with Kobe at that time. Now Duncan probably wasn't quite as great as Shaq at that time. From 2000 to 2004, maybe he did win an MVP in 2002. I believe it was 2002. But Shaq was arguably the best player in the league from the year 2000 to at least 2002. Probably should have won more than 1 MVP. But if Tim Duncan is playing with a scorer like T-Mac in his prime, there is no doubt in my mind that this duo would have won multiple championships. Again, even if Grant Hill's not healthy, they replace Grant Hill, they bring in more talent. People are going to want to come play with T-Mac and Tim Duncan. It's just, this is a what-if scenario that I absolutely love, and I love to talk about, and I love to think about. This is one of the things you want to throw on 2K, right? And you want to see how this would have played out, how many championships that this duo could have won together. Now, would Tim Duncan would he had end up staying with the Orlando Magic for the entirety of his career after he left San Antonio? There's no telling. I think it would all depend on the success, the coaching, all that type, all those things that go into a player's decision whenever they leave in free agency. But if he signs, a 4 or 5 year contract, again, to me, Magic, Lakers for probably the next 5 years. And then assuming he does stay with the Magic, there's no telling how long that they could have stayed in contention with retooling their roster, for the future. Tim Duncan was playing at a very high level up until his late 30s. Won a championship in 2014, was an integral part. And now we know Kawhi Leonard, won the MVP, the finals MVP that year. But if Tim Duncan stays on the Magic throughout the entirety of the rest of his career, there's no telling how many championships that he really could have ended up with, depending on who else, he would have played with. All because Doc Rivers did not want team families on the plane. We were robbed, I believe, of an all-time great Shaq and Kobe-esque duo that we never got a chance to see. And unfortunately, T-Mac's career kind of went, downhill after, a few years. He had a really, really solid 5 to 6, 7 year run, battled injuries. Those injuries maybe don't happen if he's playing alongside a great player like Tim Duncan. And again, we know that T-Mac never made it out of the first round. That doesn't happen if he's playing with a guy like Tim Duncan. I'm going to pretty much leave it there. Not really too much more to go into for this what-if scenario. Let me know y'all's thoughts down in the comments. What would you think a T-Mac and Tim Duncan duo? How many championships do you think they would have won? Do you think they would have won any? What do you look like? What do you think the landscape of the 2000s looks like at that point? If that signing happens, y'all let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Drop a like on the video. and I will catch y'all next episode.